Welcome to The Room to Write. We're doing a series called The Journey of a Story, where we highlight local authors who are going to introduce their work and how the work went from idea to actual book or tangible product at the end. So we're here with Carol Gordon Ekster, and she wrote You Know What, and she's going to talk about that. So hey, Carol, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you came to be a writer?
Okay. I like to say that writing came to me. I didn't come to writing because I find it very stressful. I probably still do, but not as much. But when I was younger, it was a very difficult task. But having taught for 35 years, I worked with kids on their writing. I had writing workshops, and I loved helping them write. But I did see that when you corrected children, they would be very emotionally upset. And until I started writing myself, I got it. And I think having become a writer definitely made me a better teacher. But let's veer back how writing came to me. I had no intention of writing myself, even though I helped kids write. But I was on the beach. Actually, I had just turned 50 a few months before that. And out of the clear blue, I got up, I went to my car and got Post-its and a pen and started writing my first book. I don't know why. And then it just went from there. That book was never published, and it was pretty awful. When I look back, I did everything wrong. But I immediately became involved in SCBWI, the Society of Children's Writers and Illustrators, joined critique groups, started reading everything I could, and I was very fortunate because it only took me a couple of years to get my first contract because it's hard work. And obviously I started with the first book that I wrote that would never have been published to the 20th book I wrote was the first book that sold. Wow. So it does definitely take time until you
so
become
I
an
think it's
expert.
interesting you said the Post-it notes because I think people have this idea of how writers write and that they're in a room with a typewriter or a computer, or they're in a cafe smoking a cigarette and with a hat on. But I mean, so did it sort of writing come over you that you just looked for whatever you had on hand and you just sort of had to get it out? And I just think that's an interesting point to sort of highlight what you wrote on and how that happened.
That was the first time, but after I didn't want to be caught without paper. As a matter of fact, my husband bought me a gift for the car because sometimes I would stop in the car. Something would come over me because I started late and ideas were flooding me, and I wanted to pull over and write things or while I was driving. So he got me one of those little recorder devices so that I could record while I was in the car. But now I always have, I get a lot of my ideas at night in the middle of sleep. So I always have pen and paper by my bed. I wake up saying something or a line comes to me that would solve a problem. And I write it down and then look the next morning. I find it interesting, sometimes I find from years later, like a little piece of paper in a drawer or whatever. And actually I just started a draft from something from a long time ago, a little Post-it that I wrote.
All right, and that's another great point too, is never throw anything out, I guess. And maybe you can talk about an example of when you had written something and you just sort of squirreled it away, and then all of a sudden, how did you decide that maybe I should go back and find this, or was it you just came across it and then developed it from there?
Well, sometimes like I said, the first book that sold was the 20th. But for some reason, sometimes you read something that a publisher is interested in, or for my third book, Before I Sleep, I Say Thank You. I was at a writing group, which I am in 4 critique groups. I don't know what I'd do without critique groups, because I feel like you get from the universe, there are ideas and other suggestions, and I want to take everything that's going to make my writing better. So I can't get enough feedback. So this particular writing group I was at, somebody mentioned that they went to this publisher in Boston and they were looking for a book on forgiveness and she was going to work with them. And I left that night and said, oh, I wrote years before a book on gratitude. maybe I'll take that out again. And it happened to be that this particular book started as a Jewish book from the bedtime Shema, because I woke up saying, before I sleep, it's time to pray, to thank you, God, for this good day. And I wrote it down. I said, that means something if I'm waking up and saying it. And it never got published, and it got 30 rejections. But I went home that night and said, let me take a look at this. And I looked at it, and I said, oh, I think it could go to a Catholic publisher, and that, you know, whatever. I sent it in. Now, that was 10 years later after I had written it, did I hold that book in my hand. Wow. So sometimes you have to pull it out again and see, hey, look, another book just came out that's similar to that topic. Maybe I can rework that.
Right, and so, you said a couple times that your 20th book was the first one to get published. Right. So explain that a little bit, and you know,
well,
what does that exactly
I should
mean?
say 20th manuscript. So
okay.
I just recently sent out my 80th. But you know, that sounds great. But if people knew that I have over 1,400 rejections, so you know, I'm sending it out. You have to really work hard at this. It's really not a hobby if you want to get published. I've sent it out over 1,400 times, and I have 4 books published, 1 magazine, and 1 ebook. So that's not great odds. So you have to really persevere, and you have to do your homework. Part of that homework is reading other picture books. For me, I'm a picture book writer. Okay. So I take out stacks of books from the library. I read up on every new book, and I'm always reading to see what's out there. And then I might see something, oh, I have a book similar to that. Who published it? And you know, because things are always coming around.
Right. And so when you say you sent out like 1,400, is that you're sending it directly to publishers? And do you have an agent that sends things?
I
or how
wish
do you
I
do
had
that?
an agent, really. But picture book writers make very little money. So for an agent to get 15% of your little money, it's really, really hard to get an agent. So even after I'm published, sometimes I send out, I'm not counting the 1,400 is just to publishers. I have others that I've sent to agents. So, and I, you know, keep getting rejected. Even sometimes I've had a deal, and, you know, would you help me with this? But it's you know, it's hard. Mm-hmm. One day would be nice, because then maybe I could get to with a bigger publisher. Right. But you know what? Small publishers are nice because they take better care of you in a way. You're just not one of many. So it's a nice relationship. So I'm happy with my journey.
Right.
But yes, I would like an agent.
So, and talking about sort of the money thing, which I think is another thing people are curious about, and you talk about that. You're not an illustrator, you're just you're the author.
Just a writer, yeah.
Not to say just an author, but I mean, in terms of money, is that play a part because you're now having to pay an illustrator as well, or how does that work?
I don't pay the illustrator. If you're
does
published
that come out
with
of
a
it?
regular publisher, they pay the illustrator. So perhaps if you're an author illustrator, you might get 10%, but as just the author, you get 5%. And that's usual. I mean, I have 4 different books, and one is 3%, one's 5%, one's 6%, one is 15%. So it's, you know, it's kind of different with every contract.
Okay. And do they give you anything up front, or it's just
I
based
have
on sales?
gotten things up front, not with my newest book, which is an international publisher, and they don't give upfront money, which is really fine, because then you have to, you know, work it back. You get, you know, you work it off. So.
Okay. And I think that brings us to another point we talked about before, and that was that this is a passion, not necessarily your bread and butter, basically. Right. So I think that's important for young people or people that are looking to write. And I mean, one thing I hear a lot is you have to know why are you writing? Right. And maybe when you started, was your goal to publish, or was it just to weave a nice story? I mean, how did you start?
I guess I thought I might come to being published. You know, I was a teacher who read, that my master's is in reading and language. I read picture books 4 or 5 times a day to enhance my curriculum in multiple ways, for social reasons, for math. I read it for everything. Kids knew that they came to my class, they were going to hear a lot of different books. So I thought I knew what I was doing until I got my first couple of rejections. And then, then I realized I had a lot of work to do. And I enjoyed the journey. I never said I have to be published, because otherwise you're just going to be discouraged. There's a lot of discouragement. I just heard yesterday that from the same company for You Know What, I had sent a sequel with the same character because I saw that they like to use the same character, and they rejected it. And I had run it by the illustrator first, which is very unusual, but I knew she'd have to illustrate.
Right.
And this company is fabulous in that they encourage the illustrator and the author to work together. In the U.S., that's not been my experience. They keep us apart. So I loved this idea, and I sent it to her, and we ran ideas back and forth, but then they rejected it. But I just might pick myself up and change the name and send it out again.
Right.
Because that's what you have to do. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere in this business.
Okay, and that's a great point, and that's sort of like what you did with the other Jewish bedtime
Yes,
story
you have
wrote.
to.
You just sort of rebranded it almost, and
yeah, and it's not just, I'm very low on the totem pole with authors, like famous authors like Jane Yolen. I went to her picture book boot camp. She still gets rejections. She has 350 books. She's a big name in children's literature, and she still gets rejections. So we have to understand that that's just part of the process. Rework it, send it to someone else, and just, learn from your mistakes as best you can.
Right. And so with the rejections, do they ever give you feedback, or is it just flat out no?
Yes, some do. For my first book, I got feedback that really helped me shape the story from an editor. And actually, after it was published, I sent her a book signed because I said thank you. If it wasn't for you, I don't think it would have been published. So, yes.
So, do you want to sort of walk us through the book that we're going to focus on today, and
yes.
Maybe talk about where did this idea come from? Where did you first think of it in whatever random way? And did you write it down right away, or did you tell somebody, or how it sort of started out? And then also, maybe you had a quick peek in your mind of what you thought it might end up as, and how did that journey, did it change along the way, or did it pretty much end the way you thought it would?
Well, this is unusual because I have a very specific journey in how it started. I was on the way to meet my grandson for the first time, so I know the exact date. He was born August 6th, 2014, and I was on the plane August 8th. And I always think, isn't it amazing that I was on that plane sitting one seat behind, I chose my seat myself, it was Southwest, and I happened to be sitting behind a little boy. I always do writing on a plane. I do my best writing on a plane. I've done amazing revisions. It's that tight space. I have my laptop open as much as possible. I'm always working. And I had my laptop open, and I heard the boy in front of me, which sometimes I don't hear because I'm so focused. I heard him very clearly say to his parents, "You know what?" And my fingers went right to, you know what? I started a new document, and I just started brainstorming. So I just made it like a, cause and effect kind of things. You know what? This happened. If you don't share, this happens. And I just, was making all those cause and effect things. And my husband looked over and saw me, get excited. And then he was making some funny jokes of, you know what. When I landed, I closed the laptop, and I was pretty busy with my new grandson. And I don't remember the exact date because sometimes I wish I wrote down everything, but I have a lot of stories going on, so I don't write down everything. But within a week or two, I started to work on that draft, and it just goes from the brain to my fingers. I didn't think about it, but it just became a bedtime story of a little boy and his mom, and he's delaying bedtime, and he keeps asking her, you know what? So it just was different cause and effect statements. It had no tie and no story when I first did that first draft. And then actually when I got the draft down and sent it right out, because I was excited about the story for some reason, I sent it right out to my critique group. Someone in that critique group said, take out the dad, because I was saying said mom, said dad, and then it could just be between, you wouldn't need any, dialogue tags. It just would be a conversation between the mom and the little boy. And I loved that idea. And so, it became that. And this story did not go. I sent it out to only 2 of my critique groups. Usually I send it out to more. But then I saw one of the emails about from a writing group said Clavis Publishing was having a contest. And so I wasn't finished with this draft. I sent another draft of something else, and I did not win that contest. But I got to look at their catalog, and I loved their books. And so when this was finished, this was the second company I sent it to. The first time I sent it out, I got a lovely rejection, and they said all the nice things about it. I used what they said about it and sent that to the next company about fun family antics and whatever they said, a sweet bedtime story. I took that out and sent it to Clavis. Now that was I only got 1 rejection before that. Now my other ones have 30 rejections, 16 rejections. All my books have many rejections until they were taken. So this kind of happened quickly. Quickly, I say, but then, till they found the illustrator and all that. But it didn't change that drastically from that first draft. Just a couple of small things.
And I like that you took what that first editor or publisher said and used that instead of, like you said, being like, oh, they didn't like it. You
actually they said they really liked it, but their picture book plate was full. Now, I don't know if that's a line or whatever. But the other interesting thing is when I first sent it out, I ended on this last this last page because it was supposed to be just a sweet book. He's tired. She's already tired, the mom, because he keeps saying, you know what. And he says, one more, you know what. And she says, Oliver, I'm sleepy too. I hope it's good night. And he says, no, Mommy, it's I love you. Oh, love you too, so much. Sweet dreams. And I ended it there. And someone in that online critique group said, and he's only been in it 1 time, and that I happened to send this is to me like a miracle. He said, why end it there? Why not have something a little more cheeky and fun? And so the last thing is, Mommy, you know what? And I loved that because having been a teacher, and I'll show you right away, as soon as he said that, I went and made up a sheet to go with it. If I can find it here. So I made up a sheet so that if I did a book signing or a classroom presentation, kids could write what they think that last you know what was. And I love that you can do more with the book afterwards, read or think. And the other interesting thing is that after the art director looked at they took the story, but then when they look at the first sketches and they see the sketches, the art director said, oh, I love what she did with this page. Maybe we should end there. It's so sweet. And I said, yeah, I love this. I think people will stop here, but I want them to end with a laugh. And so I think this is a great ending. But I hear you concerned, like maybe it should have a satisfying ending for parents. They don't want the kid to be acting up. And I had just read a book about using end pages. And so I said, how about if on the end pages we show him asleep? And they loved that idea. And so we did that. And so it comes with a satisfying ending. And I like how we work together as a team. That's what I loved about this company. We worked as a team to work that out. And I love how the illustrator, she added, nowhere in my story does it say, to add stuffed animals. But the stuffed animals are actually like, every page they have like expressions. So she added a whole other layer. You could look at their expressions and feel like there are more characters there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I love that. And did you want to talk about how the first title that you gave it didn't end up being?
Oh, right. So on the plane, I heard, you know what, and I started getting crazy because everywhere I went, that's all I would hear is, you know what? And if you listen, people say it all the time. So I wrote, you know what? And it's even in the catalog as YA, you know what? And then just before it went to print, I got an email that said, we're a little concerned with the you know what. if American libraries or other people, where we think maybe it should be you know what. And I was so crushed I didn't sleep that night because I felt like everybody says you know what, but I slept on it or didn't sleep on it. And I thought, it probably for people to find it, and really if you stop and listen, you know what is correct English, and they were right. And I'm really happy with it because first the book came out in Dutch. They were an international company and they print everything in Dutch first, so we didn't have to deal with that. So it was after this came out, Mama Wist Je Dat, that they approached me about the you know what. So it was kind of a late change, but it just shows you you can always change, or hopefully the reprint, because all their Dutch books never had jackets, and that was a very last-minute decision to add a jacket, which covers up the boy sleeping. But they said on a reprint, I hope, that it will they'll move the picture of him so that people will see that he's sleeping. And it also was bought for a Korean publisher. It was the rights were purchased from a Korean publisher and a Chinese publisher. So that's very exciting. That's my first time.
That is very exciting. And is there a particular reason why different cultures are drawn to it? Or, is there the fact that a Dutch company bought it first? Or
well, they said it's, in my acceptance letter, it was something like, most families will relate to that. So I think it's international. Like kids not only delaying bedtime, but, asking kids, I don't know about how it's said in other languages, but they say, you know what, or, I'm sure it's something that kids say, and I never thought of it. I mean, I heard it from a kid's mouth, but I never really thought about it. And now I wonder, what could I do with that? Because I hear it constantly. You know what? You know what?
Right. So. And do you want to talk at all about the actual, the drafts that you went through? I mean, was the text inside pretty much the same as it started, or did you, and also a little more maybe about your critique groups. Are they all online? Is this a group that you meet with in person? Is it a
there's
mix?
3 in person and 1 in line. And it's, this draft, as I say, didn't change that dramatically, a few words. I think that what I focus on as a picture book writer is every word, or especially every verb. Is there a better verb? And not to be lazy, because you could rewrite it. And so this book was hard for me in that, being a teacher, I love beautiful language. I love lyrical texts. And this is a very, youthful thing, and kind of you repeat you know what a lot. And so there wasn't that much to have lyrical or beautiful language. And I had to get past that, because kids are going to enjoy the story for the story and the beautiful illustrations, and that they're going to relate to it. But most of my books, I try really hard to have some beautiful language in there and strong verbs. And so I spend a lot of time, every single one of my manuscripts has a document on my desktop that says sentences. And so I try, take one sentence and rewrite it many times. I heard Linda Sue Park, and she won a Newbery, talk about that at a conference, how her one, I think it's called Yum Yuck, her one picture book, she took every sentence and wrote it 10 different ways and chose the best one. And that really influenced me, and that was early in my writing career. So I do that. I have a sentence document for every single story I write, because I don't think we should be lazy. I think we should give kids the very best we can give. So if there's a way I can go back and write it, I mean, I remember sending out, after I got the contract, I sent it out to my online critique group again and said, what do you think about this sentence? Even there's a word bug or insects in here, which word sounds better? And I took people's feedback, because then when you realize this is really going to touch kids' lives and kids are going to read this, I worried about every word. So I got feedback even after that it was contracted.
Okay. And so for your critique groups, how did you get involved in them, and how long have you been in them, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
As soon as I started writing, I found out about SCBWI. So usually you bring a manuscript, you print up enough for everybody. Sometimes we send it ahead online, and then we all meet and everybody has their copy and we talk about it. So while people are talking, see, this is one, a recent one that I just went to, so I saved it. And I scribble all over it. I take people's suggestions, and then I usually go home that day, that night, or let it sink in. I go back over everybody gives you their copy with their notes on it. So I go back and I see what rings true for me. Like those comments for this book, there were a couple that rang true for me. And then I take people's suggestions if I'm comfortable with it and I think it makes sense and makes my story better. So sometimes, I know this recent one, I think I'm going to rework the whole manuscript. I don't like that it was a conversation. I think it needs to be third person. So sometimes just something hits you afterwards. Nobody even said that, but I went home and thought about it, that it doesn't seem to be working. And I used to feel hurt about that, like I related to the kids that I taught. Oh yeah, this doesn't feel good. Why don't they say it's fabulous? Well, it's not. You could probably always make everything better. So, that's a gift to be able to rework it. Revision is, to me, the meat and potatoes of writing. That's where you go back and you make it better.
Do you wait a certain length of time after you get feedback to sort of let it soak in and then revise, or is there any set pattern that you use for that?
No, for me, there's no set pattern. If I'm inspired and I have time, I go back that night and work on it. If the next day I feel like working on it, or like sometimes I just open another document. I have so many that have not been sold. Sometimes I just open something because I saw something that maybe I want to send this to another publisher, and then I open it and go, ooh, that first line is just not good enough. And then I'll rework that first line. So I'm lucky I have my own hours, and I can work on anything I want to work on when it moves me.
Right. And I guess that kind of makes our way to you as a writer and your process. So if you want to sort of walk us through, like, what is, some people swear by waking up at the crack of dawn and writing right away. Some people do it at night. Some people, and where do you write? What do you write with? That sort of more personal stuff that you could share with us.
Well, I think because I was a teacher for 35 years, and my life was by the bell, for everything, and so structured that I really don't feel like I have a particular structure. So I write when I move to, and unfortunately I'm pretty passionate about it, so I spend a lot of my time doing it. But I go to exercise every morning. That's my structure. And then I come home, and the rest of the day I can, whether I'm moved to go right to the computer and write something, or sometimes when I have an idea the night before, I go right to the computer and put it down before breakfast or whatever. But usually I wait until I'm relaxed and don't have to rush out of the house, and then I can deal with my manuscript. Okay. And you have to make sure not just work on your manuscript, but time to send it out, especially if you don't have an agent, because that takes time. Researching. You don't want to just blindly send something out. You want to make sure it's the kind of publisher that takes your work or is looking for that kind of story, because that wastes a lot of time.
So do you always do your writing at home? Do you write on your laptop? Do you ever go to writing groups or to the library or anywhere public? Or do you prefer, is it quiet? Or do you do music?
I prefer putting my feet up and writing wherever. I love to write outside if it's nice weather, or in my sunroom. I love that. I don't have, I can take my laptop anywhere. Wherever I go. I sometimes take it out in the car if I'm not driving. If my husband's driving, I can work on it in the car, because I do love those confined spaces. So I can work anywhere. But I don't really like going to a public place. I think I would be kind of distracted.
Okay. You had proposed to do that. You wanted your main characters to be multicultural.
Oh, right.
And the importance of children being able to see themselves in the books that they're reading. Did you want to talk about that at all?
Well, I feel like there's a more recent push that people are making us aware that most of the characters in picture books are white, and it's sad for the many other kind of children that there are, that they can't see themselves in books. So I knew, actually I wrote it in my pitch, that I would like this to be a multicultural family. And for some reason, they didn't pass it on to the illustrator at first. And when I saw the first sketches for You Know What, I immediately wrote to the illustrator and said, if you remember, I asked, can we have a multicultural family? And she said, well, I took the sketches already from my son, and they're Dutch, and I could make him darker skinned and like Indian, if that's okay with you. And I said, I'd love anything like that. I just feel it's so important to have different kind of characters. I know that in writing about this book for some different blogs, somebody just asked me to get bedtime stories with multicultural characters so that it not just mine, if I had other ones I could mention. It's almost impossible to find. A lot of them are animals. Goodnight books are animals. But kids want to see themselves in books. So I was so thrilled, and I said, well, how are we going to show, because it's a white mom and a dark-skinned child, how can we show that? And the illustrator came up with, in the bathroom, she shows the dad and two other children, which I was at first concerned about because I didn't understand. We only see him. And she said, no, that's no problem. I have more than one. And that's what we do. We put them to bed one at a time because I only had one child. So I thought, how could this work? And then I love how she added the white dog and a black dog in there as well.
So thank you, Carol, for coming in and sharing your story with us. Do you have one last piece of advice for writers?
I probably said about revising, but I think it's even more than revising is stick with it. Work your craft. Do as much as you can. Go to conferences, join critique groups. You really have to work your craft. It's not easy. So if you care enough about it, you're going to be great at it.
All right, thank you. And if anybody would like to join us in the studio and talk about your story, contact The Room to Write, and the information should be below.